Welcome to Soft Hour Library. Tonight's story begins now. Close your eyes and rest.
The 7 Dials Mystery. Chapter 1. On Early Rising. That amiable youth, Jimmy the Sidger, came racing down the big staircase at chimneys 2 steps at a time. So precipitate was his descent that he collided with Treadwell, the stately butler, just as the latter was crossing the hall bearing a fresh supply of hot coffee. Owing to the marvelous presence of mind and masterly agility of Treadwell, no casualty occurred. "Sorry," apologized Jimmy. "I say, Treadwell, am I the last down?" "No, sir. Mr. Wade has not come down yet." "Good," said Jimmy, and entered the breakfast room. The room was empty save for his hostess, and her reproachful gaze gave Jimmy the same feeling of discomfort he always experienced on catching the eye of a defunct codfish exposed on a fishmonger's slab. Yet, hang it all, why should the woman look at him like that? To come down at a punctual 9:30 when staying in a country house simply wasn't done. To be sure, it was now 11:15, which was, perhaps, the outside limit, but even then. "Afraid I'm a bit late, Lady Coote." "What?" "Oh, it doesn't matter," said Lady Coote in a melancholy voice. As a matter of fact, people being late for breakfast worried her very much. For the first 10 years of her married life, Sir Oswald Coote, then plain Mr., had, to put it baldly, raised hell if his morning meal were even a half-minute later than 8 o'clock. Lady Coote had been disciplined to regard unpunctuality as a deadly sin of the most unpardonable nature, and habit dies hard. Also, she was an earnest woman, and she could not help asking herself what possible good these young people would ever do in the world without early rising. As Sir Oswald so often said, to reporters and others, "I attribute my success entirely to my habits of early rising, frugal living, and methodical habits." Lady Coote was a big, handsome woman in a tragic sort of fashion. She had large, dark, mournful eyes and a deep voice, an artist looking. For a model for Rachel mourning for her children would have hailed Lady Coote with delight. She would have done well, too, in melodrama, staggering through the falling snow as the deeply wronged wife of the villain. She looked as though she had some terrible secret sorrow in her life, and yet if the truth be told, Lady Coote had had no trouble in her life whatever, except the meteoric rise to prosperity of Sir Oswald. As a young girl she had been a jolly flamboyant creature, very much in love with Oswald Coote, the aspiring young man in the bicycle shop next to her father's hardware store. They had lived very happily, first in a couple of rooms, and then in a tiny house, and then in a larger house, and then in successive houses of increasing magnitude, but always within a reasonable distance of the works, until now Sir Oswald had reached such an eminence that he and the works were no longer interdependent, and it was his pleasure to rent the very largest and most magnificent mansions available all over England. Chimneys was a historic place, and in renting it from the Marquis of Caterham for 2 years, Sir Oswald felt that he had attained the top notch of his ambition. Lady Coote was not nearly so happy about it. She was a lonely woman. The principal relaxation of her early married life had been talking to the girl, and even when the girl had been multiplied by 3, conversation with her domestic staff had still been the principal distraction of Lady Coote's day. Now, with a pack of housemaids, a butler like an archbishop, several footmen of imposing proportions, a bevy of scuttling kitchen and scullery maids, a terrifying foreign chef with a temperament, and a housekeeper of immense proportions who alternately creaked and rustled when she moved, Lady Coote was as one marooned on a desert island. She sighed now heavily, and drifted out through the open window, much to the relief of Jimmy the Sidger, who at once helped himself to more kidneys and bacon on the strength of it. Lady Coote stood for a few moments tragically on the terrace and then nerved herself to speak to MacDonald, the head gardener, who was surveying the domain over which he ruled with an autocratic eye. MacDonald was a very chief and prince among head gardeners. He knew his place, which was to rule, and he ruled despotically. Lady Coote approached him nervously. "Good morning, MacDonald." "Good morning, Lady." He spoke as head gardeners should speak, mournfully, but with dignity like an emperor at a funeral. "I was wondering, could we have some of those late grapes for dessert tonight?" "They're no fit for picking yet," said MacDonald. He spoke kindly but firmly. "Oh," said Lady Coote. She plucked up courage. "Oh, but I was in the end house yesterday, and I tasted one and they seemed very good." MacDonald looked at her, and she blushed. She was made to feel that she had taken an unpardonable liberty. Evidently, the late Marchioness of Caterham had never committed such a solecism as to enter one of her own hothouses and help herself to grapes. "If you had given orders, Lady, a bunch should have been cut and sent in to you," said MacDonald severely. "Oh, thank you," said Lady Coote. "Yes, I will do that another time. But they're no properly fit for picking yet." "No," murmured Lady Coote. "No, I suppose not. We'd better leave it then." MacDonald maintained a masterly silence. Lady Coote nerved herself once more. "I was going to speak to you about the piece of lawn at the back of the rose garden. I wondered if it could be used as a bowling green. Sir Oswald is very fond of a game of bowls." "And why not?" thought Lady Coote to herself. She had been instructed in her history of England. Had not Sir Francis Drake and his knightly companions been playing a game of bowls when the Armada was sighted? Surely a gentlemanly pursuit, and one to which MacDonald could not reasonably object. But she had. Reckoned without the predominant trait of a good head gardener, which is to oppose any and every suggestion made to him. "Nay, dude, it could be used for that purpose," said MacDonald noncommittally. He threw a discouraging flavor into the remark, but its real object was to lure Lady Coote on to her destruction. "If it was cleared up cut all that sort of thing," she went on hopefully. "Aye," said MacDonald slowly, "it could be done, but it would mean taking William from the lower border." "Oh," said Lady Coote doubtfully. The words lower border conveyed absolutely nothing to her mind except a vague suggestion of a Scottish song, but it was clear that to MacDonald they constituted an insuperable objection. "And that would be a pity," said MacDonald. "Oh, of course," said Lady Coote, "it would," and wondered why she agreed so fervently. MacDonald looked at her very hard. "Of course," he said, "if it's your orders, Lady." He left it like that, but his menacing tone was too much for Lady Coote. She capitulated at once. "Oh no," she said. "I see what you mean, MacDonald. No, William had better get on with the lower border." "That's what I thought myself, Lady." "Yes," said Lady Coote. "Yes, certainly." "I thought you'd agree, Lady," said MacDonald. "Oh, certainly," said Lady Coote again. MacDonald touched his hat and moved away. Lady Coote sighed unhappily and looked after him. Jimmy the Sidger, replete with kidneys and bacon, stepped out onto the terrace beside her and sighed in quite a different manner. "Topping morning, he remarked. "Is it?" said Lady Coote absently. "Oh, yes, I suppose it is. I hadn't noticed." "Where are the others, punting on the lake?" "I expect so. I mean, I shouldn't wonder if they were." Lady Coote turned and plunged abruptly into the house again. Treadwell was just examining the coffee pot. "Oh dear," said Lady Coote, "isn't Mr. Wade, lady?" "Yes, Mr. Wade. Isn't he down yet?" "No, lady. It's very late." "Yes, lady." "Oh dear, I suppose he will come down sometime, Treadwell." "Oh, undoubtedly, lady. It was 11:30 yesterday morning when Mr. Wade came down, lady." Lady Coote glanced at the clock. It was now 20 minutes to 12. A wave of human sympathy rushed over her. "It's very hard luck on you, Treadwell, having to clear and then get lunch on the table by 1 o'clock. I am accustomed to the ways of young gentlemen, lady." The reproof was dignified but unmistakable. So might a prince of the church reprove a Turk or an infidel who had unwittingly committed a solecism in all good faith. Lady Coote blushed for the second time that morning, but a welcome interruption occurred. The door opened and a serious, spectacled young man put his head in. "Oh, there you are, Lady Coote. Sir Oswald was asking for you." "Oh, I'll go to him at once, Mr. Bateman." Lady Coote hurried out. Rupert Bateman, who was Sir Oswald's private secretary, went out the other way, through the window where Jimmy the Sidger was still lounging amiably. "Morning, Pongo," said Jimmy. "I suppose I shall have to go and make myself agreeable to those blasted girls. You coming?" Bateman shook his head and hurried along the terrace and in at the library window. Jimmy grinned pleasantly at his retreating back. He and Bateman had been at school together, when Bateman had been a serious, spectacled boy, and had been nicknamed Pongo for no earthly reason whatever. Pongo, Jimmy reflected, was very much the same sort of ass now that he had been then. The words "life is real," "life is earnest," might have been written specially for him. Jimmy yawned and strolled slowly down to the lake. The girls were there, 3 of them just the usual sort of girls, 2 with dark, shingled heads and 1 with a fair, shingled head. The one that giggled most was, he thought, called Helen, and there was another called Nancy, and the third one was, for some reason, addressed as Socks. With them were his 2 friends, Bill Eversley and Ronnie Devereux, who were employed in a purely ornamental capacity at the Foreign Office. "Hallo," said Nancy, or possibly Helen. "It's Jimmy. Where's what's-his-name?" "You don't mean to say," said Bill Eversley, "that Jerry Wade's not up yet. Something ought to be done about it." "If he's not careful," said Ronnie Devereux, "he'll miss his breakfast altogether one day, find it's lunch or tea instead when he rolls down." "It's a shame," said the girl called Socks, "because it worries Lady Coote so. She gets more and more like a hen that wants to lay an egg and can't. It's too bad." "Let's pull him out of bed," suggested Bill. "Come on, Jimmy." "Oh, let's be more subtle than that," said the girl called Socks. Subtle was a word of which she was rather fond. She used it a great deal. "I'm not subtle," said Jimmy. "I don't know how." "Let's get together and do something about it tomorrow morning," suggested Ronnie vaguely. "You know, get him up at 7, stagger the household. Treadwell loses his false whiskers and drops the tea urn. Lady Coote has hysterics and faints in Bill's arms, Bill being the weight carrier. Sir Oswald says, "Ha!" and Steele goes up a point and 5/8. Pongo registers emotion by throwing down his spectacles and stamping on them. "You don't know Jerry," said Jimmy. "I dare say enough cold water might wake him, judiciously applied, that is, but he'd only turn over and go to sleep again." "Oh, we must think of something more subtle than cold water," said Socks. "Well, what?" asked Ronnie bluntly, and nobody had any answer ready. We ought to be able to think of something, said Bill. Who's got any brains? Pongo, said Jimmy. And here he is, rushing along in a hurried manner as usual. Pongo was always the one for brains. It's been his misfortune from his youth upwards. Let's turn. Pongo on to it. Mr. Bateman listened patiently to a somewhat incoherent statement. His attitude was that of one poised for flight. He delivered his solution without loss of time. I should suggest an alarum clock, he said briskly. I always use one myself for fear of oversleeping. I find that early tea brought in a noiseless manner is sometimes powerless to awaken one. He hurried away. An alarum clock. Ronnie shook his head. One alarum clock. It would take about a dozen to disturb Jerry Wade. Well, why not? Bill was flushed in earnest. I've got it. Let's all go into Market Basing and buy an alarum clock each. There was laughter and discussion. Bill and Ronnie went off to get hold of cars. Jimmy was deputed to spy upon the dining room. He returned rapidly. He's there right enough, making up for lost time and wolfing down toast and marmalade. How are we going to prevent him coming along with us? It was decided that Lady Coote must be approached and instructed to hold him in play. Jimmy and Nancy and Helen fulfilled this duty. Lady Coote was bewildered and apprehensive. A rag, you will be careful, won't you, my dears? I mean, you won't smash the furniture and wreck things or use too much water. We've got to hand this house over next week, you know. I shouldn't like Lord Caterham to think. Bill, who had returned from the garage, broke in reassuringly. That's all right, Lady Coote. Bundle Brent Lord Caterham's daughter is a great friend of mine, and there's nothing she'd stick at, absolutely nothing. You can take it from me, and anyway there's not going to be any damage done. This is quite a quiet affair. Subtle, said the girl called Socks. Lady Coote went sadly along the terrace just as Gerald Wade emerged from the breakfast room. Jimmy the Sidger was a fair, cherubic young man, and all that could be said of Gerald Wade was that he was fairer and more cherubic, and that his vacuous expression made Jimmy's face quite intelligent by contrast. Morning, Lady Coote, said Gerald Wade. Where are all the others? They've all gone to Market Basing, said Lady Coote. What for? Some joke, said Lady Coote in her deep, melancholy voice. Rather early in the morning for jokes, said Mr. Wade. It's not so very early in the morning, said Lady Coote pointedly. I'm afraid I was a bit late coming down, said Mr. Wade with engaging frankness. It's an extraordinary thing, but wherever I happen to be staying, I'm always last to be down. Very extraordinary, said Lady Coote. I don't know why it is, said Mr. Wade, meditating. I can't think, I'm sure. Why don't you just get up, suggested Lady Coote. Oh, said Mr. Wade. The simplicity of the solution rather took him aback. Lady Coote went on earnestly. I've heard Sir Oswald say so many times that there's nothing for getting a young man on in the world like punctual habits. Oh, I know, said Mr. Wade. And I have to when I'm in town. I mean, I have to be round at the jolly old Foreign Office by 11 o'clock. You mustn't think I'm always a slacker, Lady Coote. I say, what awfully jolly flowers you've got down in that lower border. I can't remember the names of them, but we've got some at home, those mauve thingamabobs. My sister's tremendously keen on gardening. Lady Coote was immediately diverted. Her wrongs rankled within her. What kind of gardeners do you have? Oh, just one. Rather an old fool, I believe. Doesn't know much, but he does what he's told. And that's a great thing, isn't it? Lady Coote agreed that it was with a depth of feeling in her voice that would have been invaluable to her as an emotional actress. They began to discourse on the iniquities of gardeners. Meanwhile, the expedition was doing well. The principal emporium of market basing had been invaded, and the sudden demand for alarum clocks was considerably puzzling the proprietor. "I wish we'd got Bundle here," murmured Bill. "You know her, don't you, Jimmy? Oh, you'd like her. She's a splendid girl, a real good sport, and mark you, she's got brains too. You know her, Ronnie." Ronnie shook his head. "Don't know Bundle. Where have you been vegetating? She's simply it." "Be a bit more subtle, Bill," said Socks. "Stop blethering about your lady friends and get on with the business." Mr. Murgatroyd, owner of Murgatroyd Stores, burst into eloquence. "If you'll allow me to advise you, miss, I should say not the 7-11 one. It's a good clock, I'm not running it down, mark you, but I should strongly advise this kind at 10-6. Well worth the extra money. Reliability, you understand. I shouldn't like you to say afterwards." It was evident to everybody that Mr. Murgatroyd must be turned off like a tap. "We don't want a reliable clock," said Nancy. "It's got to go for one day, that's all," said Helen. "We don't want a subtle one," said Socks. "We want one with a good loud ring." "We want," began Bill, but was unable to finish, because Jimmy, who was of a mechanical turn of mind, had at last grasped the mechanism. For the next 5 minutes the shop was hideous with the loud, raucous ringing of many alarum clocks. In the end, 6 excellent starters were selected. "And I'll tell you what," said Ronnie handsomely, "I'll get one for Pongo. It was his idea, and it's a shame that he should be out of it. He shall be represented among those present." "That's right," said Bill, "and I'll take an extra one for Lady Coote. The more the merrier, and she's doing some of the spade work, probably gassing away to old Jerry now." Indeed, at this precise moment, Lady Coote was detailing a long story about MacDonald and a prize peach, and enjoying herself very much. The clocks were wrapped up and paid for. Mr. Murgatroyd watched the cars drive away with a puzzled air. Very spirited, the young people of the upper classes nowadays. Very spirited indeed, but not at all easy to understand. He turned with relief to attend to the vicar's wife, who wanted a new kind of dripless teapot. Chapter 2. Concerning Alarum Clocks. "Now where shall we put them?" Dinner was over. Lady Coote had been once more detailed for duty. Sir Oswald had unexpectedly come to the rescue by suggesting Bridgenot. That suggesting is the right word. Sir Oswald, as became one of our captains of industry, number 7 of Series I, merely expressed a preference, and those around him hastened to accommodate themselves to the great man's wishes. Rupert Bateman and Sir Oswald were partners against Lady Coote and Gerald Wade, which was a very happy arrangement. Sir Oswald played bridge, like he did everything else, extremely well and liked a partner to correspond. Bateman was as efficient a bridge player as he was a secretary. Both of them confined themselves strictly to the matter in hand, merely uttering in curt short barks, 2 no trumps, double, 3 spades. Lady Coote and Gerald Wade were amiable and discursive, and the young man never failed to say at the conclusion of each hand, "I say, partner, you played that simply splendidly," in tones of simple admiration which Lady Coote found both novel and extremely soothing. They also held very good cards. The others were supposed to be dancing to the wireless in the big ballroom. In reality, they were grouped around the door of Gerald Wade's bedroom, and the air was full of subdued giggles and the loud ticking of clocks. "Under the bed in a row," suggested Jimmy in answer to Bill's question. "And what shall we set them at? What time, I mean? all together so that there's one glorious what not or at intervals. The point was hotly disputed. One party argued that for a champion sleeper like Jerry Wade, the combined ringing of 8 alarm clocks was necessary. The other party argued in favor of steady and sustained effort. In the end, the latter won the day. The clocks were set to go off one after the other, starting at 6:38. "And I hope," said Bill virtuously, "that this will be a lesson to him." "Hear, hear," said Socks. The business of hiding the clocks was just being begun when there was a sudden alarm. "Hist!" cried Jimmy. "Somebody's coming up the stairs." There was a panic. "It's all right," said Jimmy. "It's only Pongo." Taking advantage of being dummy, Mr. Bateman was going to his room for a handkerchief. He paused on his way and took in the situation at a glance. He then made a comment, a simple and practical one. "He will hear them ticking when he goes to bed." The conspirators looked at each other. "What did I tell you?" said Jimmy in a reverent voice. "Pongo always did have brains." The brainy one passed on. "It's true," admitted Ronnie Devereux, his head on one side. 8 clocks all ticking at once do make a devil of a row. Even old Jerry, ass as he is, couldn't miss it. He'll guess something's up." "I wonder if he is," said Jimmy the Cider. "Is what?" "Such an ass as we all think." Ronnie stared at him. "We all know old Gerald." "Do we?" said Jimmy. "I've sometimes thought that it isn't possible for anyone to be quite the ass old Jerry makes himself out to be." They all stared at him. There was a serious look on Ronnie's face. "Jimmy," he said, "you've got brains." "A second Pongo," said Bill encouragingly. "Well, it just occurred to me, that's all," said Jimmy, defending himself. "Oh, don't let's all be subtle," cried Socks. "What are we to do about these clocks?" "Here's Pongo coming back again. Let's ask him," suggested Jimmy. Pongo, urged to bring his great brain to bear upon the matter, gave his decision. "Wait till he's gone to bed and got to sleep. Then enter the room very quietly and put the clocks down on the floor." "Little Pongo's right again," said Jimmy. "On the word one all park clocks, and then we'll go downstairs and disarm suspicion." Bridge was still, proceeding with a slight difference. Sir Oswald was now playing with his wife and was conscientiously pointing out to her the mistakes she had made during the play of each hand. Lady Coote accepted reproof good-humoredly and with a complete lack of any real interest. She reiterated, not once but many times, "I see, dear, it's so kind of you to tell me." And she continued to make exactly the same errors. At intervals, Gerald Wade said to Pongo, "Well played, partner, jolly well played." Bill Eversley was making calculations with Ronnie Devereux. "Say he goes to bed about 12 what? Do you think we ought to give him about an hour?" He yawned. "Curious thing, 3 in the morning is my usual time for bye-bye. But tonight, just because I know we've got to sit up a bit, I'd give anything to be a mother's boy and turn in right away." Everyone agreed that he felt the same. "My dear Maria," rose the voice of Sir Oswald in mild irritation, "I have told you over and over again not to hesitate when you are wondering whether to finesse or not. You give the whole table information." Lady Coote had a very good answer to this, namely that, as Sir Oswald was dummy, he had no right to comment on the play of the hand. But she did not make it. Instead, she smiled kindly, leaned her ample chest well forward over the table, and gazed firmly into Gerald Wade's hand where he sat on her right. Her anxieties lulled to rest by perceiving the queen. She played the knave and took the trick, and proceeded to lay down her cards. 4 tricks and the rubber, she announced. I think I was very lucky to get 4 tricks there. Lucky, murmured Gerald Wade, as he pushed back his chair and came over to the fireplace to join the others. Lucky, she calls it. That woman wants watching. Lady Coote was gathering up notes and silver. I know I'm not a good player, she announced in a mournful tone which nevertheless held an undercurrent of pleasure in it, but I'm really very lucky at the game. You'll never be a bridge player, Maria, said Sir Oswald. No, dear, said Lady Coote. I know I shan't. You're always telling me so, and I do try so hard. She does, said Gerald Wade sotto voce. There's no subterfuge about it. She'd put her head right down on your shoulder if she couldn't see into your hand any other way. I know you try, said Sir Oswald. It's just that you haven't any card sense. I know, dear, said Lady Coote. That's what you're always telling me, and you owe me another 10 shillings, Oswald. Do I? Sir Oswald looked surprised. Yes, 1708 pounds 10. You've only given me 8 pounds. Dear me, said Sir Oswald, my mistake. Lady Coote smiled at him sadly and took up the extra 10-shilling note. She was very fond of her husband, but she had no intention of allowing him to cheat her out of 10 shillings. Sir Oswald moved over to a side table and became hospitable with whiskey and soda. It was 12:30 when general goodnights were said. Ronnie Devereux, who had the room next door to Gerald Wade's, was told off to report progress. At 1:45, he crept round tapping at doors. The party, pajamaed and dressing-gowned, assembled with various scuffles and giggles and low whispers. His light went out about 20 minutes ago, reported Ronnie in a hoarse whisper. I thought he'd never put it out. I opened the door just now and peeped in, and he seemed sound off. What about it? Once more the clocks were solemnly assembled. Then another difficulty arose. We can't all go barging in. Make no end of a row. One person's got to do it, and the others can hand him the whatnots from the door. Hot discussion then arose as to the proper person to be selected. The 3 girls were rejected on the grounds that they would giggle. Bill Eversley was rejected on the grounds of his height, weight, and heavy tread, also for his general clumsiness, which latter clause he fiercely denied. Jimmy the Siger and Ronnie Devereux were considered possibles, but in the end, an overwhelming majority decided in favor of Rupert Bateman. Pongo's the lad, agreed Jimmy. Anyway, he walks like a cat always did, and then, if Jerry should waken up, Pongo will be able to think of some rotten, silly thing to say to him. You know, something plausible that'll calm him down and not rouse his suspicions. Something subtle, suggested the girl Socks thoughtfully. Exactly, said Jimmy. Pongo performed his job neatly and efficiently. Cautiously opening the bedroom door, he disappeared into the darkness inside bearing the 2 largest clocks. In a minute or 2 he reappeared on the threshold, and 2 more were handed to him, and then again twice more. Finally he emerged. Everyone held his breath and listened. The rhythmical breathing of Gerald Wade could still be heard, but drowned, smothered and buried beneath the triumphant, impassioned ticking of Mr. Murgatroyd's 8 alarm clocks. Chapter 3. The Joke That Failed. 12 o'clock, said Socks despairingly. The joke had not gone off any too well. The alarm clocks, on the other hand, had performed their part. They had gone off with a vigor and elan that could hardly have been surpassed, and which had sent Ronnie Devereux leaping out of bed with a confused idea that the day of judgment had come. If such had been the effect in the room next door, what must it have been at close quarters? Ronnie hurried out in the passage and applied his ear to the crack of the door. He expected profanity, expected it confidently and with intelligent anticipation. But he heard nothing at all. That is to say, he heard nothing of what he expected. The clocks were ticking all right, ticking in a loud, arrogant, exasperating manner. And presently another went off, ringing with a crude, deafening note that would have aroused acute irritation in a deaf man. There was no doubt about it. The clocks had performed their part faithfully. They did all and more than Mr. Murgatroyd had claimed for them, but apparently they had met their match in Gerald Wade. The syndicate was inclined to be despondent about it. "The lad isn't human," grumbled Jimmy the Sidger. "Probably thought he heard the telephone in the distance and rolled over and went asleep again," suggested Helen, or possibly Nancy. "It seems to me very remarkable," said Rupert Bateman seriously. "I think he ought to see a doctor about it." "Some disease of the eardrums," suggested Bill hopefully. "Well, if you ask me," said Socks, "I think he's just spoofing us. Of course they woke him up, but he's just going to do us down by pretending that he didn't hear anything." Everyone looked at Socks with respect and admiration. "It's an idea," said Bill. "He's subtle, that's what it is," said Socks. "You'll see, he'll be extra late for breakfast this morning just to show us." And since the clock now pointed to some minutes past 12, the general opinion was that Socks' theory was a correct one. Only Ronnie Devereux demurred. "You forget I was outside the door when the first one went off. Whatever old Jerry decided to do later, the first one must have surprised him. He'd have let out something about it. Where did you put it, Pongo?" "On a little table close to his ear," said Mr. Bateman. "That was thoughtful of you, Pongo," said Ronnie. "Now tell me," he turned to Bill, "if a whacking great bell started ringing within a few inches of your ear at 6:30 in the morning, what would you say about it?" "Oh, Lord," said Bill, "I should say he came to a stop." "Of course you would," said Ronnie. "So should I, so would anyone. What they call the natural man would emerge. Well, it didn't. So I say that Pongo is right as usual and that Jerry has got an obscure disease of the eardrums." "It's now 20 past 12, said one of the other girls sadly. "I say," said Jimmy slowly, "that's a bit beyond anything, isn't it? I mean, a joke's a joke, but this is carrying it a bit far. It's a shade hard on the coots." Bill stared at him. "What are you getting at?" "Well," said Jimmy, "somehow or other it's not like old Jerry." He found it hard to put into words just what he meant to say. He didn't want to say too much, and yet he saw Ronnie looking at him. Ronnie was suddenly alert. It was at that moment Treadwell came into the room and looked round him hesitatingly. "I thought Mr. Bateman was here," he explained apologetically. "Just gone out this minute through the window," said Ronnie. "Can I do anything?" Treadwell's eyes wandered from him to Jimmy the Sidger and then back again. As though singled out, the two young men left the room with him. Treadwell closed the dining room door carefully behind him. "Well," said Ronnie, "what's up?" "Mr. Wade not having yet come down, sir. I took the liberty of sending Williams up to his room." "Yes. Williams has just come running down in a great state of agitation, sir." Treadwell paused a pause of preparation. "I am afraid, sir, the poor young gentleman must have died in his sleep." Jimmy and Ronnie stared at him. "Nonsense," cried Ronnie at last. It's impossible." Jerry, his face worked suddenly. "I'll run up and see. That fool Williams may have made a mistake." Treadwell stretched out a detaining hand. With a queer, unnatural feeling of detachment, Jimmy realized that the butler had the whole situation in hand. "No, sir, Williams has made no mistake. I have already sent for Dr. Cartwright, and in the meantime I have taken the liberty of locking the door, preparatory to informing Sir Oswald of what has occurred. I must now find Mr. Bateman." Treadwell hurried away. Ronnie stood like a man dazed. "Jerry," he muttered to himself. Jimmy took his friend by the arm and steered him out through a side door on to a secluded portion of the terrace. He pushed him down onto a seat. "Take it easy, old son," he said kindly. "You'll get your wind in a minute." But he looked at him rather curiously. He had had no idea that Ronnie was such a friend of Jerry Wade's. "Poor old Jerry," he said thoughtfully. "If ever a man looked fit, he did." Ronnie nodded. "All that clock business seems so rotten now," went on Jimmy. "It's odd, isn't it, why farce so often seems to get mixed up with tragedy?" He was talking more or less at random to give Ronnie time to recover himself. The other moved restlessly. "I wish that doctor would come. I want to know." "Know what?" "What he died of." Jimmy pursed up his lips. "Heart," he hazarded. Ronnie gave a short, scornful laugh. "I say, Ronnie," said Jimmy. "Well?" Jimmy found a difficulty in going on. "You don't mean you aren't thinking, I mean. You haven't got it into your head well, I mean he wasn't biffed on the head or anything. Treadwell's locking the door and all that." It seemed to Jimmy that his words deserved an answer, but Ronnie continued to stare straight out in front of him. Jimmy shook his head and relapsed into silence. He didn't see that there was anything to do except just wait, so he waited. It was Treadwell who disturbed them. "The doctor would like to see you two gentlemen in the library, if you please, sir." Ronnie sprang up. Jimmy followed him. Dr. Cartwright was a thin, energetic young man with a clever face. He greeted them with a brief nod. Pongo, looking more serious and spectacled than ever, performed introductions. "I understand you were a great friend of Mr. Wade's," the doctor said to Ronnie. "His greatest friend." Well, this business seems straightforward enough. Sad, though. He looked a healthy young chap. Do you know if he was in the habit of taking stuff to make him sleep?" "Make him sleep?" Ronnie stared. "He always slept like a top." "You never heard him complain of sleeplessness?" "Never." "Well, the facts are simple enough. There'll have to be an inquest, I'm afraid, nevertheless." "How did he die?" "There's not much doubt. I should say an overdose of chloral. The stuff was by his bed, and a bottle and glass. Very sad, these things are." It was Jimmy who asked the question which he felt was trembling on his friend's lips, and yet which the other could somehow or other not get out. "There's no question of foul play." The doctor looked at him sharply. "Why do you say that? Any cause to suspect it, eh?" Jimmy looked at Ronnie. If Ronnie knew anything, now was the time to speak. But to his astonishment, Ronnie shook his head. "No cause whatever," he said clearly. "And suicide, eh?" "Certainly not." Ronnie was emphatic. The doctor was not so clearly convinced. "No troubles that you know of. Money troubles, a woman." Again Ronnie shook his head. "Now about his relations. They must be notified." "He's got a sister, a half-sister rather, lives at Dean Priory, about 20 miles from here. When he wasn't in town, Jerry lived with her." Said the doctor. "Well, she must be told." "I'll go," said Ronnie. "It's a rotten job, but somebody's got to do it." He looked at Jimmy. "You know her, don't you?" "Slightly. I've danced with her once or twice." Then we'll go in your car. You don't mind, do you? I can't face it alone. That's all right, said Jimmy reassuringly. I was going to suggest it myself. I'll go and get the old bus cranked up. He was glad to have something to do. Ronnie's manner puzzled him. What did he know or suspect? And why had he not voiced his suspicions if he had them to the doctor? Presently the two friends were skimming along in Jimmy's car, with a cheerful disregard for such things as speed limits. Jimmy, said Ronnie at last, I suppose you're about the best pal I have now. Well, said Jimmy, what about it? He spoke gruffly. There's something I'd like to tell you, something you ought to know. About Jerry Wade. Yes, about Jerry Wade. Jimmy waited. Well, he inquired at last. I don't know that I ought to, said Ronnie. Why? I'm bound by a kind of promise. Oh, well then, perhaps you'd better not. There was a silence. And yet I'd like you see, Jimmy. Your brains are better than mine. They could easily be that, said Jimmy unkindly. No, I can't, said Ronnie suddenly. All right, said Jimmy, just as you like. After a long silence, Ronnie said, What's she like? Who? This girl, Jerry's sister. Jimmy was silent for some minutes. Then he said in a voice that had somehow or other altered, She's all right. In fact, well, she's a corker. Jerry was very devoted to her, I know. He often spoke of her. She was very devoted to Jerry. It's going to hit her hard. Yes, a nasty job. They were silent till they reached Dean Priory. Miss Loring, the maid told them, was in the garden, unless they wanted to see Mrs. Coker. Jimmy was eloquent that they did not want to see Mrs. Coker. Who's Mrs. Coker? Asked Ronnie as they went round into the somewhat neglected garden. The old trout who lives with Loring. They had stepped out into a paved walk. At the end of it was a girl with two black spaniels, a small girl, very fair, dressed in shabby old tweeds, not at all the girl that Ronnie had expected to see. Not, in fact, Jimmy's usual type. Holding one dog by the collar, she came down the pathway to meet them. How do you do, she said. You mustn't mind Elizabeth. She's just had some puppies and she's very suspicious. She had a supremely natural manner, and as she looked up smiling, the faint wild rose flush deepened in her cheeks. Her eyes were a very dark blue like cornflowers. Suddenly they widened was it with alarm, as though already she guessed. Jimmy hastened to speak. This is Ronnie Devereux, Miss Wade. You must often have heard Jerry speak of him. Oh, yes. She turned a lovely, warm, welcoming smile on him. You've both been staying at Chimneys, haven't you? Why didn't you bring Jerry over with you? We couldn't, said Ronnie and then stopped. Again Jimmy saw the look of fear flash into her eyes. Miss Wade, he said, I'm afraid we've got bad news for you. She was on the alert in a moment. Jerry. Yes, Jerry, he's. She stamped her foot with sudden passion. Oh, tell me, she turned suddenly on Ronnie. You'll tell me. Jimmy felt a pang of jealousy, and in that moment he knew what up to now he had hesitated to admit to himself. He knew why Helen and Nancy and Socks were just girls to him and nothing more. He only half heard Ronnie's voice saying gravely, Yes, Miss Wade, I'll tell you, Jerry is dead. She had plenty of pluck. She gasped and drew back, but in a minute or two she was asking eager, searching questions. How? When? Ronnie answered her as gently as he could. Sleeping draft, Jerry. The incredulity in her voice was plain. Jimmy gave her a glance. It was almost a glance of warning. He had a sudden feeling that Lauren in her innocence might say too much. In his turn, he explained as gently as possible the need for an inquest. She shuddered. She declined their offer of taking her back to Chimneys with them, but explained she would come over later. She had a two-seater of her own. "But I want to be alone a little first," she said piteously. "I know," said Ronnie. "That's all right," said Jimmy. They looked at her, feeling awkward and helpless. "Thank you both ever so much for coming." They drove back in silence, and there was something like constraint between them. "My God, that girl's plucky," said Ronnie once. Jimmy agreed. "Jerry was my friend," said Ronnie. "It's up to me to keep an eye on her." "Oh, rather, of course." They said no more. On returning to Chimneys, Jimmy was waylaid by a tearful Lady Coot. "That poor boy," she kept repeating, "that poor boy." Jimmy made all the suitable remarks he could think of. Lady Coot told him at great length various details about the decease of various dear friends of hers. Jimmy listened with a show of sympathy, and at last managed to detach himself without actual rudeness. He ran lightly up the stairs. Ronnie was just emerging from Gerald Wade's room. He seemed taken aback at the sight of Jimmy. "I've been in to see him," he said. "Are you going in?" "I don't think so," said Jimmy, who was a healthy young man with a natural dislike to being reminded of death. "I think all his friends ought to." "Oh, do you?" said Jimmy, and registered to himself an impression that Ronnie Devereux was damned odd about it all. "Yes, it's a sign of respect." Jimmy sighed but gave in. "Oh, very well," he said, and passed in, setting his teeth a little. There were white flowers arranged on the coverlet, and the room had been tidied and set to rights. Jimmy gave one quick, nervous glance at the still, white face. Could that be cherubic pink Jerry Wade? That still peaceful figure? He shivered. As he turned to leave the room, his glance swept the mantelshelf, and he stopped in astonishment. The alarum clocks had been ranged along it neatly in a row. He went out sharply. Ronnie was waiting for him. "Looks very peaceful and all that. Rotten luck on him," mumbled Jimmy. Then he said, "I say, Ronnie, who arranged all those clocks like that in a row?" "How should I know? One of the servants, I suppose." "The funny thing is," said Jimmy, "that there are 7 of them, not 8. One of them's missing. Did you notice that?" Ronnie made an inaudible sound. 7 instead of 8, said Jimmy, frowning. "I wonder why." Chapter 4. A letter. "Inconsiderate, that's what I call it," said Lord Caterham. He spoke in a gentle, plaintive voice, and seemed pleased with the adjective. He had found. "Yes, distinctly inconsiderate. I often find these self-made men are inconsiderate. Very possibly that is why they amass such large fortunes." He looked mournfully out over his ancestral acres, of which he had today regained possession. His daughter, Lady Eileen Brent, known to her friends and society in general as Bundle, laughed. "You'll certainly never amass a large fortune," she observed dryly, "though you didn't do so badly out of old Coot sticking him for this place. What was he like? Presentable?" "One of those large men," said Lord Caterham, shuddering slightly, "with a red square face and iron-gray hair. Powerful, you know. What they call a forceful personality. The kind of a man you'd get if a steamroller were turned into a human being." "Rather tiring," suggested Bundle sympathetically. "Frightfully tiring, full of all the most depressing virtues like sobriety and punctuality. I don't know which are the worst, powerful personalities or earnest politicians. I do so prefer the cheerful inefficient. A cheerful inefficient wouldn't have been able to pay you the price you asked for this old mausoleum, Bundle reminded him. Lord Caterham winced. I wish you wouldn't use that word, Bundle. We were just getting away from the subject. I don't see why you're so frightfully sensitive about it, said Bundle. After all, people must die somewhere. They needn't die in my house, said Lord Caterham. I don't see why not. Lots of people have. Masses of stuffy old great-grandfathers and grandmothers. That's different, said Lord Caterham. Naturally, I expect Brents to die here, they don't count. But I do object to strangers, and I especially object to inquests. The thing will become a habit soon. This is the second. You remember all that fuss we had 4 years ago, for which, by the way, I hold George Lomax entirely to blame. And now you're blaming poor old steamroller Coote. I'm sure he was quite as annoyed about it as anyone. Very inconsiderate, said Lord Caterham obstinately. People who are likely to do that sort of thing oughtn't to be asked to stay. And you may say what you like, Bundle. I don't like inquests. I never have and I never shall. Well, this wasn't the same sort of thing as the last one, said Bundle soothingly. I mean, it wasn't a murder. It might have been from the fuss that thick head of an inspector made. He's never got over that business 4 years ago. He thinks every death that takes place here must necessarily be a case of foul play fraught with grave political significance. You've no idea the fuss he made. I've been hearing about it from Treadwell. Tested everything imaginable for fingerprints. And of course they only found the dead man's own. The clearest case imaginable, though, whether it was suicide or accident, is another matter. I met Jerry Wade once, said Bundle. He was a friend of Bill's. You'd have liked him, Father. I never saw anyone more cheerfully inefficient than he was. I don't like anyone who comes and dies in my house on purpose to annoy me, said Lord Caterham obstinately. But I certainly can't imagine anyone murdering him, continued Bundle. The idea's absurd. Of course it is, said Lord Caterham, or would be to anyone but an ass like Inspector Raglan. I dare say looking for fingerprints made him feel important, said Bundle soothingly. Anyway, they brought it in death by misadventure, didn't they? Lord Caterham acquiesced. They had to show some consideration for the sister's feelings. Was there a sister? I didn't know. Half-sister, I believe. She was much younger. Old Wade ran away with her mother. He was always doing that sort of thing. No woman appealed to him unless she belonged to another man. I'm glad there's one bad habit you haven't got, said Bundle. I've always led a very respectable, God-fearing life, said Lord Caterham. It seems extraordinary, considering how little harm I do to anybody, that I can't be let alone, if only. He stopped as Bundle made a sudden excursion through the window. MacDonald, called Bundle in a clear, autocratic voice. The Emperor approached. Something that might possibly have been taken for a smile of welcome tried to express itself on his countenance, but the natural gloom of gardeners dispelled it. Your ladyship, said MacDonald. How are you, said Bundle. I'm no vera grand, said MacDonald. I wanted to speak to you about the bowling green. It's shockingly overgrown. Put someone onto it, will you? MacDonald shook his head dubiously. It would mean taking William from the lower border, lady. Damn the lower border, said Bundle. Let him start at once, and MacDonald. Yes, lady. Let's have some of those grapes in from the far house. I know it's the wrong time to cut them because it always is, but I want them all the same. See. Bundle re-entered the library. "Sorry, Father," she said. "I wanted to catch MacDonald. Were you speaking?" "As a matter of fact, I was," said Lord Caterham. "But it doesn't matter. What were you saying to MacDonald?" "Trying to cure him of thinking he's God Almighty. But that's an impossible task. I expect the coots have been bad for him. MacDonald wouldn't care one hoot, or even two hoots for the largest steamroller that ever was. What's Lady Coot like?" Lord Caterham considered the question. "Very like my idea of Mrs. Siddons," he said at last. "I should think she went in a lot for amateur theatricals. I gather she was very upset about the clock business." "What clock business?" "Treadwell has just been telling me. It seems the house party had some joke on. They bought a lot of alarum clocks and hid them about this young Wade's room. And then, of course, the poor chap was dead, which made the whole thing rather beastly." Bundle nodded. "Treadwell told me something else rather odd about the clocks," continued Lord Caterham, who was now quite enjoying himself. "It seems that somebody collected them all and put them in a row on the mantelpiece after the poor fellow was dead." "Well, why not?" said Bundle. "I don't see why not myself," said Lord Caterham. "But apparently there was some fuss about it. No one would own up to having done it, you see. All the servants were questioned and swore they hadn't touched the beastly things. In fact, it was rather a mystery. And then the coroner asked questions at the inquest, and you know how difficult it is to explain things to people of that class." "Perfectly foul," agreed Bundle. "Of course," said Lord Caterham, "it's very difficult to get the hang of things afterwards. I didn't quite see the point of half the things Treadwell told me. By the way, Bundle, the fellow died in your room." Bundle made a grimace. "Why need people die in my room?" she asked with some indignation. "That's just what I've been saying," said Lord Caterham in triumph. "Inconsiderate. Everybody's damned inconsiderate nowadays." "Not that I mind," said Bundle valiantly. "Why should I?" "I should," said her father. "I should mind very much. I should dream things, you know, spectral hands and clanking chains." "Well," said Bundle, "Great Aunt Louisa died in your bed. I wonder you don't see her spook hovering over you." "I do sometimes," said Lord Caterham, shuddering, "especially after lobster." "Well, thank heavens I'm not superstitious," declared Bundle. Yet that evening, as she sat in front of her bedroom fire, a slim, pajamaed figure, she found her thoughts reverting to that cheery, vacuous young man, Jerry Wade. Impossible to believe that anyone so full of the joy of living could deliberately have committed suicide. No, the other solution must be the right one. He had taken a sleeping draught and by a pure mistake had swallowed an overdose. That was possible. She did not fancy that Jerry Wade had been overburdened in an intellectual capacity. Her gaze shifted to the mantelpiece, and she began thinking about the story of the clocks. Her maid had been full of that, having just been primed by the second housemaid. She had added a detail which apparently Treadwell had not thought worth while retailing to Lord Caterham, but which had piqued Bundle's curiosity. 7 clocks had been neatly ranged on the mantelpiece. The last and remaining one had been found on the lawn outside, where it had obviously been thrown from the window. Bundle puzzled over that point now. It seemed such an extraordinarily purposeless thing to do. She could imagine that one of the maids might have tidied the clocks and then, frightened by the inquisition into the matter, have denied doing so. But surely no maid would have thrown a clock into the garden. Had Jerry Wade done so when its first sharp summons woke him? But no, that again was impossible. Bundle remembered hearing that his death must have taken place in the early hours of the morning, and he would have been in a comatose condition for some time before that. Bundle frowned. This business of the clocks was curious. She must get hold of Bill Eversley. He had been there, she knew. To think was to act with Bundle. She got up and went over to the writing desk. It was an inlaid affair with a lid that rolled back. Bundle sat down at it, pulled a sheet of notepaper towards her and wrote, "Dear Bill." She paused to pull out the lower part of the desk. It had stuck halfway, as she remembered it often did. Bundle tugged at it impatiently, but it did not move. She recalled that on a former occasion an envelope had been pushed back with it and had jammed it for the time being. She took a thin paper knife and slipped it into the narrow crack. She was so far successful that a corner of white paper showed. Bundle caught hold of it and drew it out. It was the first sheet of a letter, somewhat crumpled. It was the date that first caught Bundle's eye. A big flourishing date that leaped out from the paper. Sept 21st. September 21st, said Bundle slowly. Why, surely that was. She broke off. Yes, she was sure of it. The 22nd was the day Jerry Wade was found dead. This, then, was a letter he must have been writing on the very evening of the tragedy. Bundle smoothed it out and read it. It was unfinished. Am why darling Loraine will be down on Wednesday. Am feeling awfully fit and rather pleased with myself all round. It will be heavenly to see you. Look here, do forget what I said about that 7 DIALS business. I thought it was going to be more or less of a joke, but it isn't anything but. I'm sorry I ever said anything about it. It's not the kind of business kids like you ought to be mixed up in. So forget about it, see. Something else I wanted to tell you, but I'm so sleepy I can't keep my eyes open. Oh, about Lurcher, I think. Here the letter broke off. Bundle sat frowning. 7 DIALS. Where was that? Some rather slummy district of London, she fancied. The word 7 DIALS reminded her of something else, but for the moment she couldn't think of what. Instead, her attention fastened on 2 phrases. Am feeling awfully fit, and I'm so sleepy I can't keep my eyes open. That didn't fit in. That didn't fit in at all. For it was that very night that Jerry Wade had taken such a heavy dose of chloral that he never woke again. And if what he had written in that letter was true, why should he have taken it? Bundle shook her head. She looked round the room and gave a slight shiver. Supposing Jerry Wade were watching her now. In this room he had died. She sat very still. The silence was unbroken save for the ticking of her little gold clock. That sounded unnaturally loud and important. Bundle glanced towards the mantelpiece. A vivid picture rose before her mind's eye. The dead man lying on the bed and 7 clocks ticking on the mantelpiece, ticking loudly, ominously, ticking. Ticking.